Funny thing about family portraits, they always know who to crop out. I adjusted my collar, feeling the stiff edge of the navy blue fabric graze the side of my neck as I stepped into the house. It had been 5 years since I'd walked through the front doors of the Quinn estate, and yet not a single thing had changed. The chandeliers still bled light onto polished marble, casting long, expensive shadows across the room. There were trays of champagne being passed between guests, dressed in pastel tones, men in cufflinks shaped like anchors, and women in blush silks clinking flutes mid-laugh. Somewhere, a string quartet played a soft, overly practiced rendition of Claire de Lune. I moved quietly along the edge of the party like I always had, unnoticed and unnamed. Just another reflection in the window. The last time I was here, Emily's graduation, I stood in full dress uniform waiting to hear both our names called. Hers rang out, followed by cheers and applause. Mine never came. That day, I learned the power of omission. Now I wore a plain dress that didn't try too hard, hair pulled back, in a way that felt neutral. I wasn't here to stand out. I was here because Emily had asked me, in a tone that left no room to say no. "It's just one night, Harper. Come for me," as if showing up for her was still something I owed. I was halfway to the bar when I heard her voice rise, lilting with charm. "Everyone meet my sister Harper. She runs, what is it again? A rowing program for wayward kids, kind of like a counselor. Or a marine babysitter." Laughter. Full-throated, effortless, real. I smiled politely, nodding at a sea of vaguely familiar faces. One of my cousins leaned in and whispered, "Didn't you, drop out of the Navy or something?" Then she took a sip from her glass and drifted away as if the question answered itself. I reached for a drink, not caring what it was. The flute was cold, the bubbles sharp on my tongue. My mother passed nearby, giving me a glance that skimmed rather than settled. She stopped to adjust a centerpiece before turning to a guest. "Emily's worked so hard for this," she said. "She really deserves the spotlight." Of course she did. I edged closer to a quiet corner of the room, angling my body away from the spotlight Emily had been born into. My gaze wandered, landing on the portraits lining the hallway. Our family's legacy of service, framed and polished great-grandfather Quinn in what you owed to Uncle Jeremiah from the Gulf War. And there, near the end, the most recent addition, Emily in chef whites holding a plated amuse-bouche. I kept walking. No frame for me. A low voice broke through my thoughts. "You don't like parties, do you?" I turned. Nathan Cross. Tall, tailored, confident in a way that didn't beg for approval. He held his drink with ease, but his eyes were sharper than his smile. "Not really my thing," I said, setting my glass down. I figured. He looked at me like he was cataloging details. "Emily told me you work with boats. She says a lot of things," I replied, watching the curl of his mouth shift. "I help teach rowing. At-risk youth. It's simple." But that's not all, he said, slowly letting the words hover. "You know your way around more than oars." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Silence has a texture, and he was feeling the shape of mine. "Harper," he said, stepping closer, "I've seen someone stand like that before. At inspection, at attention." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You're a Navy captain, aren't you?" Everything stopped. The air thickened as if the room had tilted. Conversations faltered. A spoon clinked against a plate, and then nothing. Dead quiet. Even the music seemed to falter, the strings unsure of their cue. I didn't speak. I didn't blink. I just met his gaze head-on and waited for the echo of his question to land wherever it needed to. Across the room, my father raised his glass. No smile, just a tired, worn gesture he had used on toasts and scoldings alike. "Let's not make a big deal, again. You don't notice you've been erased until someone else starts looking for you in the frame." The library wasn't meant for wandering. Not at parties like this. It was a room for heritage, not guests, lined with shelves more dusted than red, filled with hardcovers no one opened, and polished portraits that stared down like silent judges. But the voices and music behind me had grown too loud, and I needed air that wasn't tinged with perfume and pretense. I slipped inside and shut the door behind me with a soft click. The room was warmer than the rest of the house, lit by wall sconces that spilled amber light across military medals and commemorative flags encased in glass. A heavy curtain veiled the far window, and a grandfather clock ticked with the kind of rhythm that dared you to speak. The silence felt earned in here, but brittle. Like something sacred had been broken and glued back together without ceremony. I ran my fingers along the edge of the mantel, pausing at a photo I hadn't seen in years. Captain Raymond Quinn. My father stood in full uniform posture, impeccable medals aligned like stars. He looked younger, resolute, a man frozen in devotion to duty. Beside his frame was a much newer image, Emily smiling wide, her chef's coat pristine as she held a medal from the Jameson Culinary Institute. Between them stood nothing, nothing in the middle. Like no one came next. I kept walking until I reached a low console tucked beneath the larger display shelf. On it sat a cluster of smaller frames, family trips, Christmas cards, beach snapshots from summers we pretended to enjoy. One frame leaned awkwardly, half obscured by a potted orchid. I reached for it. It was me, in dress whites. The photo was from Southgate Academy, my final deployment ceremony. But the image had been cropped at the shoulder. The rank, the insignia, the ribbons, they were gone. Only my face remained, and even that looked dimmed. A ghost of someone almost important. I exhaled slowly. Not surprised. Not really. A soft knock behind me. I didn't turn. Wrong room, I figured, said a voice. Nathan. His footsteps were light but confident as he entered, taking in the room the way you'd scan a deck after a storm looking for damage. I thought you might need air, he said. This place is airtight. I gave a humorless smile. It's good for preserving trophies. He stepped beside me, examining the photos. His gaze lingered on the one of my father, then dropped to the edited version of mine. They didn't just forget, he murmured. They deleted. I said nothing. He pulled something from his jacket pocket and unfolded it carefully. A creased flyer worn at the edges like it had been handled more than once. I found this in a veteran's archive, he said, handing it to me. I was researching a story back when I did freelance military pieces. I took it. My breath hitched. Southgate Naval Memorial, Ceremony, March 2017. Among the listed honorees, Captain Harper Quinn, noted for heroic command conduct during the Pacific Crisis evacuation. It was real. My name. Printed. Recognized. I don't even remember this, I said, scanning the details. They never told me there was a memorial. I wasn't invited. Nathan watched me carefully, his eyes tracing the tremor in my hands. That's the point. You weren't supposed to be. I folded the paper slowly, pressing the edges flat again. My gaze lifted to the wall, to the blank space between Raymond and Emily. They kept the name they were proud of, I whispered, and deleted mine. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The room itself echoed the words back to me, heavy with quiet agreement. From the far chair, a low cough drew our attention. Uncle Francis, my father's older brother, sat half-shadowed behind a leather-bound atlas, eyes sharp behind gold-rimmed glasses. I hadn't realized he was there. You led the North Pacific run, he said abruptly. We heard bits of it. Back channels. You brought them home, didn't you? I blinked. Yes. 18 survivors. He nodded once, but didn't rise. They buried more than logs that year. Your name deserved more than this. Then he looked away, lost again in the past. Nathan gave me a look that asked if I was all right. I wasn't sure how to answer. As I moved to leave, he followed me to the door. Before I could reach for the knob, he spoke again, quiet, serious. I think you should come with us, he said. I froze. The cruise. It's just a few days, but there's more to this, Harper. I can feel it. The ship looked new, but so do coffins until you realize what they're built for. The silver horizon shimmered under the morning sun like it had been carved from glass and vanity. Everything gleamed: chrome railings, spotless decks, polished windows that reflected the harbor in perfect symmetry. From a distance, it looked like something out of a commercial for wealth and wellness, the kind of vessel that promised curated experiences and imported champagne. But even before I stepped on board, something in my chest tightened. It was too pristine. Real ships bore history. Even the cleaned ones creaked somewhere, held a scent of rust and rope and rain-soaked salt. But the horizon had no scent, no creak, no texture. Just a polished silence. Nathan carried both our bags despite my protest, and Emily bounced ahead of us in a crisp white sundress, greeting the crew like a self-appointed ambassador. "This is going to be so good for you," she said over her shoulder. "Sea air detox, no duties. You need a break, Harper. Just be." I didn't reply. I hadn't been just anything in a long time. We were welcomed aboard with artificial smiles and neatly pressed uniforms. The staff looked the part, but when one of them offered to take my bag, his grip slipped and he fumbled the balance like someone new to both weight and protocol. I caught it before it hit the deck and handed it back without a word. His ears reddened. Inside the ship was a maze of curated luxury. Oak-paneled lounges, scented hallways, crystal fixtures. Everything was polished to a high sheen, and yet it felt staged, like a set. Like someone had built a replica of a ship but didn't know what details actually mattered to people who sailed. My assigned room was 2 decks below the guest suites, just above the engine compartment. When I asked the steward, he offered a rehearsed shrug. "Full up top." This was the best available, ma'am. The key card worked, but the hallway lights buzzed slightly and the air smelled faintly of metal and paint thinner. Inside the walls were narrow, the bed a slab, and the only window a thick piece of porthole glass clouded by sea spray, or maybe by age. This was no luxury suite. I left the room almost immediately and wandered the lower decks. Just walking, just watching. That's when I saw it. A young deckhand struggling with a mooring knot near the midship bulkhead. It was simple, a clove hitch. He twisted it wrong twice, muttering under his breath, "Mind if I asked?" He jumped, startled. I stepped in, took the rope looped and pulled. Fast, clean, tight. "Clove hitch," I said. "You'll want it clean if weather turns." He blinked. "Yes, ma'am. Thanks. Didn't expect that I knew knots. Know that you'd care." I didn't answer. Further along, I passed an emergency panel bolted into the wall. It looked new, but something was off. I opened the latch easy. No resistance. And found the fire control schematic, missing half its routing diagram. The suppression system was listed, but the code panel was deactivated. I checked another terminal outside the nav deck, blank screen. Radar uplink inactive. None of this was normal. I was heading toward the observation lounge when I heard a voice like molasses cut with a lemon twist. "You must be our mysterious sister." I turned. Graham Vale. Tall, tailored teeth, too white to be real. He wore a cream blazer over a pastel blue shirt, no tie, but the collar starched with intent. His handshake was soft but firm, like a man who'd practiced making first impressions in the mirror. "I'm Graham, cruise director, experience curator, trouble repellent." He laughed at his own line. "Harper," I said. "Passenger." "Ah, yes, Emily's sister, the counselor." He let the word dangle. I said nothing. "Relax," he continued. "We're all family here. That's what makes Silver Horizon special. You're here to unwind, reconnect, not, supervise." His smile held, but the edge beneath it sharpened. "You're here as family, not crew," he said, voice silk over steel. "Please don't confuse the two." I tilted my head, studied him. "And you're here as, what, captain or game show host?" He laughed too loud, then clapped his hands. "That's the spirit." He vanished into the next room, still smiling. Later, after dinner was announced, some beat foam thing I ignored. I drifted back toward the lower corridors. Something about the smell down here stuck with me. Too sterile, too freshly painted. I passed another emergency panel and paused. The edges had been covered with a fresh coat of light gray, but a small chip near the latch revealed something darker underneath. I crouched, scraped it gently with my key. There, barely visible, etched into the metal, SN57 1A RQ. I froze. That wasn't a civilian code. It was a Navy serial number. The kind etched into support hardware on military vessels, always buried under layers of registry and history. This wasn't a repurposed lounge ship. This was something older. Something masked. Something that had been built for a very different kind of voyage. Some ships hold memories like salt in the wood. You can cover them in gold, but they still creak the same. The rain tapped lightly against the porthole as I moved through the lower deck corridor, boots echoing against metal. The engine room wasn't on the passenger tour, but I hadn't asked for permission. Something about the Navy serial number still itched in the back of my mind, the way a half-remembered warning hovers just out of reach. Past the galley storage tucked behind a service hallway marked authorized crew only. I pushed through a door left slightly ajar. The thrum of machinery greeted me like an old song I didn't want to remember. The air down here was thick, warm, a little oily and vibrating with the quiet growl of power running through cables older than their glossy casings suggested. A man stood with his back to me, hunched over a junction box. He had a toolkit open, one hand on a voltmeter, the other tapping at a panel. His uniform was stained sleeves rolled to the elbow, revealing tanned forearms marked with old burns and creases that only came from real work. "You're not one of the floating bartenders," I said. He turned slowly, dark eyes a scar near his temple and a faint smile that barely moved his lips. "Neither are you," he said. "But your stance gave you away before your voice did." I paused. Which stance? The kind that knows which direction the danger comes from. I didn't correct him. I didn't need to. He extended a hand. "Miles Herrera, systems engineer. I keep the lights on when the pretty parts fail." "Harper," I said. "Passenger. Technically." He raised a brow. "Technically." "Right." He motioned me closer. "This ship hums wrong. It's not a luxury retrofit. It's not even a refit. It's something else." I stepped beside him, watching the meter. The readings were uneven, too much draw from the secondary batteries. "These aren't load fluctuations. Something's siphoning." He nodded. "You, Navy eye?" I gave a half shrug. "Was. A long time ago." He smiled faintly. "Still are. That not correction you did yesterday. Only people with ocean hours think like that." He reached into the back of the panel and pulled out a rolled slip of paper. "I found this behind a coolant bin. Didn't trust it enough to open it alone." We unfurled it on the floor, an old route chart hand-marked with pencil and pen. The original path curved along the northeast coastline. The hand-drawn one veered out hard east, then cut south into deeper blue. My stomach turned. "This sector's flagged. Decommissioned test zone since 2017. Exactly." He tapped the mark. "They're not hugging the coast for a pleasure cruise. They're heading toward military waters." I folded the chart carefully, and no one told the guests. We climbed back up 2 decks, slipping into the mid-level bar, where Graham sat under pendant lights swirling something amber in a glass designed more for show than sip. He looked up unbothered. "Evening," he said cheerfully. "Did our little adventurer get lost again?" I held the chart out without speaking. He took one glance, then leaned back in his seat. "People pay for danger now," he said, as if he were explaining the appeal of a new cocktail. "Calm is boring. They didn't pay for military zones." He shrugged. "We're in international waters soon. Nothing illegal about a little spontaneity. Unless something goes wrong." Graham raised his glass. "Then we blame the storm." I didn't respond. He was already bored of the conversation, already sipping his own narrative. That night, the storm didn't come from outside. I lay awake in my bunk, the dim light above flickering slightly with each lurch of the ship. The engine still hummed low beneath the floor, but something about the rhythm had changed. Offbeat, nervous, like the vessel was breathing wrong. Then I heard it. 3 knocks, precise, sharp, spaced exactly apart. I sat up slowly, heart thudding, pressed my ear to the wall. Nothing. Then again 3 knocks. Same rhythm. My blood turned to ice. Morse. S-O-S. I rose quickly, barefoot, pressing my hand flat to the cool steel. The wall was solid, but something about the sound had come from inside, not behind furniture or pipe. Inside. I crouched, fingers tracing the base of the panel where paint had started to peel. Someone had scratched into the surface. Faintly. Deliberate. "This ship never came back." The words weren't new. They were old. Weathered by time, salt, or fingernails. The kind you write when you're not sure anyone will ever see them, but need to try anyway. The ocean doesn't erase the dead, it just waits for us to look deeper. The air down here didn't move. It just hung there, wet with mildew, dense with rust, and stale from secrets. Miles led the way, flashlight beams slicing through the dark like a scalpel. We had followed a maintenance map he'd drawn from memory, one not listed on the official guest schematic. No wonder. The hall twisted lower than any normal crew corridor and ended in a sealed bay door with a number stenciled halfway through corrosion C23E. "You sure this isn't just an old storage dump?" I asked, wrapping my jacket tighter. The walls felt cold enough to draw breath. Miles crouched and pulled a small flat device from his pocket, magnetic edge clinking as he pressed it to the lock mechanism. "It's not storage," he said. "Circuit traces on this bay route directly to the ship's communications core." I looked again at the rust curling across the hinges and the faint discoloration along the base. Something had leaked here once. Something that hadn't been cleaned up, just painted over. A soft click. The panel opened inward with a groan. The scent of metal fatigue and old electricity hit me like a memory I'd never had, sharp chemical like the moment before lightning finds ground. Inside the room was no bigger than a walk-in freezer. Rows of obsolete terminals lined the walls, their screens black. But tucked in the back behind a cracked panel and a draped tarp that looked suspiciously Navy issue was a cabinet with a blinking green light. Miles stepped forward. Still powered. That means emergency backup was rerouted through here. He cracked the seal and reached inside. A low whir sounded as a tray slid out, revealing a black box the size of a lunch tin. Faint etchings lined the top. Navy-style cereals. I ran my hand over them and my fingers shook. "This is older than the Silver Horizon," I said. "This is legacy tech." Miles plugged a converter into the console and booted it with a small external screen. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screen flickered. Static bled across the top, and then clarity. A timestamp: April 14th, 2017. 3:12 a.m. black and white. No sound. The footage came from a ceiling-mounted cam, probably near the comms hall. Two men entered the frame, dragging someone between them, a third man limp but alive, his head lolling. The camera struggled to follow, but I leaned in, pulse rising. The man being dragged wore a torn Navy uniform. His hands trembled, one boot scraping the floor. He struggled to speak. Miles narrowed his eyes. "He's saying something." We watched his lips form the same phrase over and over. No audio, but rhythm matters. "They know," Miles said softly. "He's repeating it 3 times. They know. They know. They know." I could barely breathe. The shape of the officer's face, bruised, half covered in shadow, but unmistakable in its structure. "That's not just some crewman," I said. "That's my father." I didn't realize I'd said it aloud until the words landed in the silence between us. Miles didn't speak, just tightened his jaw and pressed for the next file. A title card flashed: Project Melon Echo, Experimental Class Registry Date June 2016, March 2017. Status decommissioned pending refit beneath it. A schematic scrolled ship specs nearly identical to the Silver Horizon, save for one thing: the base hull serial number. I checked the paint scrape number from the emergency panel I'd found the day before. Match. "They didn't build this ship," I said, voice breaking. "They resurrected it." As Miles cross-checked data logs, I moved to a small rusted drawer near the cabinet base. It was locked with a mechanical latch, old, stubborn. I pried it open with a broken screwdriver from the wall mount and heard the soft metallic sigh as it gave way. Inside a single box, flat black velvet lined. I lifted it slowly, heart pounding. The insignia rested inside, dulled with age, but intact: Captain Raymond Quinn, engraved in bold serif across the back. My knees nearly gave out. I ran my thumb along the etched letters. Cold. Real. Not a ghost, not a whisper proof. "You didn't abandon us," I whispered. "They buried you. Some secrets don't stay sunken. They just wait for the right storm." The legacy drive gave off a low warmth against my palm, as if it still remembered the moment it last recorded. I followed Miles back into the electronics archive, deeper this time, into a narrow corridor behind the backup engine bay where the walls sweated from heat, but the light flickered like it was already failing. The door to the archive room stuck at first. Miles braced his shoulder against the edge and shoved. It groaned open into stale air and a dust-blanketed bank of terminals, old, cold, and long since forgotten by the ship's curated surface. These machines had teeth once. Now they waited for hands who spoke their language. He connected the black box to the most intact interface. A series of whirs and ticks broke the quiet and then static. The speakers crackled alive, coughing out bits of garbled noise, layers of interference, a burst of sound like metal tearing underwater. Then a voice. Override initiated. We leaned in. The signal distorted, then resumed. Captain Quinn refused. My chest locked. The voice was broken, strained through filters of time, data compression, and pain, but the name rang clear. Quinn. That's not a routine log, I whispered. That's a report mid-failure. Miles tapped a sequence. There's more in here. Someone tried to wipe it, but fragments are cached. If we resequence? The door behind us creaked open. I spun, half reaching for nothing instinct from another life. A figure stepped through. Slim, dark braid tucked under a loose cap. She looked like she belonged to the ship, but carried herself like someone used to being underestimated. Jada Kim, she said, offering a clipped nod. I saw the system drain spike from engineering. No one's supposed to be pulling current from this deck. Miles straightened. We're following a trail. You can report it if you want. I won't. She walked forward, scanning the black box, then the half-lit screen. That drive's restricted. Naval Registry Series. RQ, Class Right. I blinked. You recognize it. She exhaled. I trained at Southgate. Cyber defense track. There was a protocol siren. They made us simulate overrides. Scenario-based failure of command integrity. Only captains could block it. My voice came out dry. What does siren do? She didn't look at me, just at the screen. It reroutes command, ignores captain-level dissent. It was a contingency experimental, unethical. They phased it out, supposedly. Miles replayed the clip. The voice returned buried in static. Captain Quinn refused override, initiating contingency, system lockdown, remove primary, then silence. The timestamp blinked on the screen. Zone 117. March 17th, 2017. Jada froze. That's a test zone, she said. The one that got decommissioned after the comms blackout. I nodded slowly. He logged a refusal. Miles scrolled. The logs ended abruptly. A single line of metadata remained: command terminated. Subject unresponsive. Jada's voice trembled. He tried to stop them. That's why he disappeared. The screen dimmed. Then, without warning, the speaker flared again, soft, low, unmistakable. We all turned. The room held its breath. A Morse ping, SOS, 3 beats, 3 long, 3 short. But this time it wasn't playback. It was live. The pulse came from below, not the system, not the archive. From the hull, from the deep. A man who smiles too often on a sinking ship isn't naive. He's in control of the lifeboat. The VIP lounge shimmered like a mirage at golden hour, soft violins drifting under the hum of idle wealth, rose glasses raised against the burnished edge of the setting sun. Velvet banquettes, crystal lighting the scent of citrus and salt. Everything staged for elegance, curated to distract. But the sea beyond the glass felt colder now, like it knew what was coming. I stepped inside, slowly scanning for him. Graham stood near the rail, framed by light that made him look mythic, host of a dream no one realized was rotten at the core. He laughed at something a guest said, teeth gleaming, blazer creaseless. But the tilt of his shoulders was too exact, too studied. That wasn't joy. That was performance. I took my time crossing the room, threading between the guests like a current under still water. Emily waved at me briefly from a group by the canapé tower. Nathan caught my eye from the bar, watching without moving. He'd learned to read my signals. I gave none yet. Graham turned as I neared. Ah, he said warmly, our reluctant sailor. Did we lure you into luxury after all? I smiled just enough. The violin quartet was hard to resist. He chuckled. Nothing like a little string harmony to make you forget the waves. I set my drink down on the edge of the marble counter. Unless you know what's beneath them. His smile twitched. Barely, but I saw it. I was just reading about some fascinating old tech, I said. You ever hear of Siren Protocol? He blinked, smooth as a blink can be, but something behind his eyes flickered. Then sounds like a horror film. Or an overpriced wine brand. I leaned in slightly. It's a military override system. Obsolete. Supposedly. Used to cut a captain out of the chain of command if the system deemed them unreliable. Graham lifted his glass and swirled it lazily. Sounds convenient. For the system, it was trialed on exactly one ship, one voyage, Zone 117, 2017. He set the glass down carefully. You've been busy. I'm not the only one, I said. Turns out some ships don't stay buried, even if you repaint the deck and rename the hull. He let the silence stretch long and delicate like a drawn bow. We don't raise ghosts at cocktail hour, Harper, he said finally. It spoils the mood. Nathan shifted behind him now within earshot. Graham knew. He always knew the audience. But let's say purely hypothetically you were right, he said, voice softer now, silk wrapping something sharp. You want to unbury the truth. Be careful. What if it was meant to stay dead? I met his eyes. Then whoever buried it should be ready when it claws back up. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded sheet, a replica of the override directive. Not the original, but a printed match of the fragment pulled from the black box. Falsified, dated, signed with a name that should never have appeared on that order. I placed it on his tray. He didn't touch it, just looked. Then after a beat, he lifted his glass, sipped and smiled. But the smile didn't reach his eyes. You think I buried one, Quinn, he said, voice low now. Intimate. How many more do you want to lose? ChatGPT, Denoy. There's always one room the map won't show, and that's where the real history sleeps. The crawlspace behind Storage Deck C smelled like sea rot and rusted lies. Miles had memorized the older blueprints. Jada carried a heat cutter she shouldn't have had access to. And I carried the name. We moved without speaking, each of us wired tight beneath the skin. The emergency lights above blinked in steady intervals, painting our shadows across the steel like ghosts caught mid-confession. The closer we got, the more the air changed cooler, denser charged like before a storm. There, Miles said, voice low. A bulkhead panel tucked behind a half-collapsed metal crate. It had no identifier, no locking mechanism, just a sheet of dull steel. It seems almost invisible, except for the faint welding burn scars along the edges. Not on the map, he added. Because it was never meant to exist, I said. Jada flicked on the cutter, the flame hissing to life with a ghost blue tongue. The first spark bit into the panel and the steel groaned. It took 6 minutes and more strength than expected. Finally, with a last stubborn tear of metal, the panel gave way, revealing a small chamber beyond. The air that came out was dead. We stepped in one at a time. No lights. Only dust, decay, and silence. The room was the size of a supply bay, but its walls were padded not for comfort, for insulation. Old terminals lined the walls, blank and yellowed. A rack of oxygen tanks stood along the far side, every gauge flatlined. One had burst long ago, scorched metal curling outward. The floor bore scratch marks, frantic diagonal, overlapping, as if someone had fought to claw their way out. I moved to the central console. The screen blinked to life under my fingers, just barely. A single file was queued in standby, log.rqfinal.8.txt. I tapped it open. If you find this, don't trust the man who holds the map. Below it, a voice file auto-loaded, static. Then a man's voice, soft, hoarse, but mine in its DNA. If my daughter ever reads this. I tried. God help me, I tried to stop it. The feed cut, no timestamp, just raw fragments stitched together by desperation. Miles turned toward a far cabinet, pulling the door open. Dust spilled out in a soft cloud. Inside, amid rusted tools and rotted cloth, was a plastic ID sleeve. He handed it to me. I didn't need to read the name. The photo had faded, but the eyes were unmistakable. Dark-focused, tired in the way command makes you. Captain Raymond Quinn. The mag strip had been burned with acid, the edges scorched. Someone had gone to great lengths to make sure it wouldn't scan again. I stared at it for a long moment. Time didn't move in that room. Grief didn't either. Just weight, the kind you carry forever, without ever knowing when you first picked it up. Then Jada's breath caught. She stood in front of a smaller terminal in the corner, barely lit, but the glow cast her face in stark relief. She tapped a key, revealing the system log. Access override. Executed 04:29 a.m., March 18th, 2017. Authorized by G. Vale. She turned toward me, color drained from her face. This wasn't a disappearance, she whispered. It was a kill and cover. It wasn't just about hiding the truth. It was about making sure no one remembered to ask. At first, it felt like a shift in the wind. The floor beneath me leaned barely like a ship easing through a cross current. But we weren't near weather. The sea had been flat for miles. Jada stiffened at the same moment I did, her eyes tracking the red emergency lights as they began to pulse softly overhead. No siren. No voice. Just light. Miles swore. That's not a drill. A hiss echoed through the corridor behind us, doors slamming shut. All at once, a cold whisper passed through the metal around us. Lockdown. I knew that sound. He's activating erasure protocol, I said, breath clipped. Same system from the Melon Echo. Full sector quarantine signal reroute, ventilation controlled. Total ship compartmentalization. Basically, Miles muttered, pulling up a diagnostic pad. We're inside the coffin. And he's sealing the lid. I turned toward Jada. Where's the comms relay closest to analog bypass deck C starboard side, behind the auxiliary nav? But all vertical routes are sealed. Not all, I said. Come on. We ducked back into the service corridor, moving fast. The crew had vanished, probably corralled or locked out. The ship's soft luxury lighting now blinked red along the edges, a heartbeat counting down. A grated panel above the generator room led into the duct system. Miles boosted me up first, then Jada. He followed, last grunting as he wedged into the crawl space. The air was hotter here, stagnant, dust-laced, and with every inch forward, the metal groaned louder. The ship wasn't built for this kind of stress. We moved through the ducts like rats under a ballroom, shuffling past grated vents that revealed passenger suites now dark and silent. Then voices. Below, muffled panic. Nathan. He was crouched near the sealed stairwell door, pounding quietly on the panel. I tapped on the grate from above. His head snapped up. You better not be a ghost, he whispered. Not today, I said, yanking the panel. Come on. He climbed fast, more agile than I expected. Once inside, he handed me a small case. Private uplink, he said. Still connects to satellite relays when the ship's jammers are offline. Just need a strong enough terminal. We know one, Jada said. Comms bay behind auxiliary nav. We crawled another 20 feet, then dropped into a storage closet hidden behind a rust-stained bulkhead. The room stank of oil and mold, but the terminal was intact. Miles started working immediately, hands flying. All outgoing signals are being rerouted through a black site relay node. Untraceable. They're erasing logs as we speak. Nathan plugged in the uplink. Give me 10 seconds. I reached for the black box we'd salvaged from the hidden room. Slid the final file into the drive. The screen hesitated, then loaded. A voice, warped but clear, cracked across the comms channel. If my daughter ever reads this. I tried. God help me, I tried to stop it. The screen blinked. Red. Incoming override detected. System reset in 90 seconds. I turned toward the others. We had less than 2 minutes to make sure the world remembered. They called him Lost at Sea. But I just heard his voice, and it's guiding me home. Rain hammered the outer hull like a war drum, beating in time with my pulse. The comms room vibrated under our boots, not just from the storm, but from what we were about to do. Lightning slashed the mist outside into strobe flashes, illuminating the desperate angles of a ship trying to erase itself. We weren't just broadcasting data, we were breaking a seal the world had left shut for 6 years. Nathan was hunched over the uplink terminal, his jaw tight as he ran diagnostics on the signal stabilizer. Jada held the mechanical lock engaged on the door, fingers pale from pressure. Miles hovered beside the wall interface, rewiring the final loop to bypass the remaining block. Relays active, Nathan called. She'll hold. Barely. I didn't wait. The black box drive clicked into place beneath my palm. The screen blinked once, then again. The file loaded slowly, as if even the system was afraid to speak it aloud. I pressed play. At first, only static. Then came the voice. If this is heard, then I failed to save them. But maybe she won't. It was him. Not a ghost. Not a memory twisted by grief. Captain Raymond Quinn. My father, speaking through time, through fire, through silence. His voice held no fear. only fatigue. And hope. Project Siren is not salvageable. I repeat, this vessel is compromised. Override protocol is not consent. To whoever finds this document, everything. Don't let them write the ending. The rain outside grew louder, as if the sea itself leaned closer to listen. Then the door burst open. Graham. His hair was soaked blazer clinging to him like plastic wrap. His eyes wild, not desperate, but furious that we'd gotten this far. "You think anyone gives a damn about your hero daddy?" he barked. "You think the world hasn't moved on?" I didn't flinch. I faced him fully. "Then let's bring it back." His hand twitched toward the emergency power cut. Too slow. I slammed the transmit all button. The screen lit up like a sunrise. Coordinates, audio logs, Project Siren. Override order metadata, the falsified directive, the captain's final confession. All of it spilling into the global feed, bypassing Graham's black site relay, bouncing through Nathan's encrypted uplink into international maritime networks. Across the globe, monitors pinged. Harper Quinn and her father had finally spoken. Graham staggered back, mouth open but silent. The terminal blinked. Incoming message. Veritas command node response active. A calm, clipped voice echoed through the speaker. "This is Veritas. We've received your broadcast. Stand by. Truth doesn't knock. It bursts in when you're least prepared and dares you to stand." June 6th. Morning. The rain had lifted, but the air still carried its weight. The main observation deck, once a glittering showcase for curated sunsets and champagne-fueled selfies, had been transformed into something colder, more sterile. Chairs lined in stiff rows, screens wheeled in, a long table turned tribunal, and behind it, the officers from Veritas' naval gray uniforms, with silent eyes and clipboards full of protocols. The ship no longer felt like his, and Graham knew it. He sat to my left, not bound yet but contained. Two Veritas officers flanked him like punctuation. He was still wearing the same blazer from the night before, though it no longer looked tailored, it looked defeated. Nathan stood at my side, unreadable. Jada and Miles hovered behind the technical crew, watching the feed transmission stabilize. Emily sat in the front row, pale lips tight, as if any sudden sound might shatter her. And my parents quiet, distant. Watching from the fringe, their expressions frozen in the same cocktail party composure they'd worn at Emily's engagement. But this wasn't a celebration anymore. One of the Veritas officers stepped forward. "We've reviewed the transmission logs. The satellite confirms origin from this vessel. We now request statements and evidence in sequence." I nodded, then hit play. The room dimmed slightly as the screen flared to life. If this is heard, then I failed to save them. But maybe she won't. My father's voice cut through the room like a scalpel. Not dramatic, not embellished, just true. Gasps rippled through the guests. Some clutched coats tighter, others leaned forward, eyes wide. The footage rolled. The override logs, the voice prints, the metadata. All of it projected across the very ship that had tried to forget it. Graham didn't move. Until the final line echoed, "Don't trust the man who holds the map." He leaned forward, speaking over the final seconds. "This is emotional manipulation. You're watching edited files spliced by someone who's frankly unstable. Look at her record. Look at her discharge." He turned to the crowd, hand outstretched toward me like a magician revealing his trick. "Ask why it was sealed. Ask what she broke before she boarded this ship." I stayed still. Nathan didn't. He stepped forward, slow measured, then lifted a printed sheet from the folder he'd held all morning. "Redacted by Graham Vale," he said, clearly, voice echoing across the chamber. "Here's the metadata trail." He sealed her file himself, after splicing it into a non-standard security classification only used by external contractors. He handed the sheet to the nearest Veritas officer. She scanned it, lips tightening. Then another voice, shaky. "Emily." She stood blinking rapidly. I saw it," she whispered. "The override. Years ago. I saw it in one of Graham's backup folders. I didn't know what it meant, but I said nothing. I thought it was just protocol. Silence." The Veritas officer at the center finally turned toward Graham. "You are hereby placed under arrest for falsification of naval records, obstruction of justice, and endangerment of civilian lives under maritime protection law." Two officers took his arms. He didn't resist, but as they walked him past me, he paused, looked over his shoulder. "You'll never scrub the stain of silence," he said, "not even with truth." Then he was gone. And for the first time in 6 years, the ship was quiet, and it wasn't because of fear. They turned it into a stage. We made it into a courtroom. Now it sails as evidence. June 6th bled quietly into June 7th. The storm had passed, but its fingerprints were still pressed across the deck, the puddled footprints of those who had run the scorch marks from overloaded terminals. The hairline fractures along the walls of a ship that had once carried secrets like ballast. Now it carried them like confession. The Silver Horizon, no longer hiding behind that polished name, had been renamed in the Veritas files already Mellon Echo recovery vessel. In every report, every transmission, every breath, it was no longer a luxury cruise. It was Exhibit A. I stood beside Commander Reyes of Veritas as we toured the sealed chamber we'd cut open days before. The oxygen tanks were still empty, the scratches on the wall untouched. I hadn't let anyone clean it. It needed to stay visible. Not just for us, but for the world. "This is where he left his final log," I said, voice steadier than I expected. "This is where they shut the door, and walked away." Reyes nodded grim. "We suspected Graham for a while, but without hard drives, without chain of custody. It was all just shadow work." He motioned to Miles, who was kneeling in the corner beside a rust-streaked panel. "We found something," Miles said, tapping a corner bolt. The section came free with a hollow clunk. Inside a server the size of a lunchbox. Old, pre-retrofit, untouched. It buzzed faintly when powered on. The data was intact. Flight path logs, crew manifests, override experiments, security footage, the test failures, the order that silenced the distress beacon, the erased names, the stolen command chain. It was all there, time-stamped and unaltered. Later that day, I stood on the old bridge where Graham had once hosted influencers sipping champagne while death waited below. Now only truth remained. The console no longer lit with stage lights. It displayed log entries, unfiltered, unpolished. "This was meant to be erased," I said, staring out at the horizon. "We chose to remember." That night, the world responded. The first headline came from Singapore, then London, then Washington. By dawn, it was global. Former Navy captain uncovers military cover-up on lost vessel. Captain Quinn's daughter brings justice to light. The ship that wasn't supposed to sail, again now speaks. I didn't speak to the cameras. I didn't need to. My father had already said what mattered. And I had followed through. Then, while watching a slow sunrise break the horizon, I received a ping on my comm. Sender Southgate Naval Academy. Subject, honor roll. Revision request message. "We would like to re-add your father's name to the Wall of Honor. And yours, Captain Quinn." I stared at the screen unmoving. Not because I needed their validation, but because after everything we'd pulled from the deep, someone else finally chose to remember. The sea forgets nothing. It just waits for the brave to remember out loud. June 8th. The storm had passed, but the wake it left behind moved slower, deeper. Not waves, but conversations, fragments, unfinished sentences. The kind that started with, "I didn't know," and ended with, "but I should have." The Silver Horizon no longer felt haunted. It felt hollowed, cleansed in a way that came not from bleach or polish, but from confession. And consequence. Veritas held press briefings from the forward lounge, a room once used for champagne toasts and influencer drone footage. Now it hosted solemn retellings, evidence walkthroughs, and lists of names, some restored, some finally spoken. Emily found me near the port rail where the fog had finally lifted. She stood quietly for a long moment before saying anything. Her eyes, always so expertly rimmed in soft tones, were bare now. "Honest. Maybe." "I was jealous," she whispered. "You were always the brave one, and I let them pretend you weren't." I didn't answer. She stepped closer. "I didn't lie, not directly, but I let them think you were gone. I didn't correct them. I let them give me the light, and I stayed in it while they shadowed you." I turned to her. "You watched them erase me. Then you let them write your name in my space." Tears pooled in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Harper." I nodded once, but I didn't say I forgave her. Some truths live beyond apology. Later, in a converted observation room, I faced my parents. They'd requested a moment. Not with warmth, with obligation. My father spoke first. "We thought you were unstable. After the discharge, after what happened in 17. "You never asked what happened," I replied. "You accepted the version that made you most comfortable." My mother added, "It was complicated. We didn't know how to help. And Emily was thriving, and you thought silence was safer than faith." I said, standing. "But silence is what killed him, and what nearly erased me." I walked out without waiting for a reply. Some things deserve to remain unfinished. That afternoon, Nathan stood before a line of reporters and Veritas representatives. Captain Harper Quinn didn't just uncover a cover-up, he said, his voice steady clear. "She held the line when the system collapsed. I've served under commanding officers in combat zones. None more composed, none more righteous." Applause came not with fanfare but with weight. The kind of clapping that comes from recognition, not entertainment. Jada, to my surprise, accepted an offer from Veritas leading a maritime safety education initiative. She smiled as she told me, "You cracked open the silence, Harper. I want to teach people how not to repeat it." That evening, I sat alone on the same deck chair where I'd first boarded. Back then, I'd kept my pack small and my shoulders tighter. Now the chair felt different. Or maybe I did. It took losing my name for the world to remember it. The sun was lower now, the sky brushing orange. I didn't move as footsteps approached, sure, quiet, familiar. Nathan sat beside me, holding something rolled under one arm. "They're greenlighting your ship design," he said, voice soft. "It's time to build the Iris. You don't rebuild legacy with metal, you do it with memory and the will to carry it forward." June 9th, 2023. Oregon coast. The dry dock stretched like a scar across the land-rusted beams, towering cranes, salt-eaten scaffolding. But in the center of it all stood something clean, new. Not polished for show, but forged for endurance. The Iris. Her hull still gleamed in primer gray. Her frame, angular and balanced, mirrored old Navy schematics, but every line was softened by intention. She wasn't built to disappear into war. She was built to be seen, to teach, to remember. The sky was sharp with early morning mist light breaking over the water like stained glass. I stood before the crowd on a raised platform, wind tugging at the collar of my dark blue jacket. Below me, students, cadets, engineers, reporters, veterans in fold-out chairs, families with folded letters in their hands, and faces I didn't expect: former instructors, ex-colleagues, people who had once whispered I was unstable, now leaning forward as if trying to catch every word. Jada stood off to the side, a clipboard tucked against her hip, watching the cadets run through morning drills. Nathan checked a line of international delegates, his tone clipped, confident. It was no longer just our fight. It had become a standard. I cleared my throat and spoke. "When we first found the Silver Horizon, the ship once known as the Mellon Echo, we thought it was a tragedy buried. But we were wrong. It wasn't buried, it was hidden. A few heads bowed in recognition, others stiffened. We don't train captains to follow," I continued. "We train them to stand, to speak even when silence is easier, especially then." Applause followed, not loud but firm, grounded, like the feet of people who understood what it meant to hold fast in shifting waters. Later, as the ceremony broke into smaller gatherings, I received a box. Inside, letters. Dozens. Handwritten. From the families of those who had died aboard the original Mellon Echo. "We never got a truth. You gave us one. Thank you for not letting him vanish without a name. Because of you, my daughter knows her father wasn't a ghost." I read them slowly, folding each one back with trembling fingers. Then came the moment I'd avoided. I walked up the gangway onto the Iris, alone. The bridge still smelled of solder and sealant, but the helm's solid oak paneling reclaimed from the Echo's original bulkhead held something more sacred. A small brass frame bolted in place. Inside, a photo. Faded but clear. Captain Raymond Quinn. My father. His eyes looked toward the horizon, as if still searching for what came next. I reached out, brushing my fingers across the edge of the helm, then tapped the command panel. A low hum filled the room. "Welcome aboard, Captain Quinn," the system replied, voice soft, genderless, calm. I closed my eyes, just for a moment. When I stepped back onto the dock, the sun had broken fully. The light hit the hull at just the right angle, so even the shadows looked like part of the design. Near the launch ramp, a girl stood, no older than 14. Cap low on her head, hands tucked behind her back. She raised one in a crisp salute. I blinked. Then I returned it, slow, deliberate. Some legacies are inherited, others are forged. This one was earned. The map doesn't define the journey. The hands on the helm do. June 10th, 2023, dawn. The sky was the color of pale fire. The sea stretched glass flat beneath it, unbroken, except by a slow, even glide of the iris cutting forward through the morning mist. The dock was long gone behind us, blurred by distance and memory. Before us, open water. Cadets lined the deck for their first roll call. They stood with boots, freshly laced shoulders, too stiff trying to mimic confidence they hadn't earned yet. I stood before them in my dark blue uniform, nothing ornate, but every seam stitched with quiet authority. The air still smelled of varnish and salt and hope. I called their names one by one. Each answered with a loud, "Here, ma'am," some voices cracking with nerves, others already sharp as rigging lines. It was less about volume than about being counted, being known. Nathan watched from near the central console. He didn't speak, didn't smile, just observed with that familiar narrowed gaze the way he always did when something mattered too much to interrupt. After the final name echoed over the water, I dismissed them gently. We sail to learn, not to impress. Eyes forward, feet planted. As they dispersed into training groups, one cadet lingered. A girl named Anika, 14, barely tall enough to see over the lower railing. She kept glancing toward the lifeboat harness with unease. I walked to her side. "You scared of the drop drill?" She hesitated, then nodded. "You're not the first," I said, then tapped the harness. "But fear's like fog. It doesn't last in the wind. Hold tight through the first fall. After that, you'll crave the climb." She blinked at me like I'd spoken a language she didn't expect to understand, but she nodded again, this time with more weight. Nathan joined me as she returned to the others. "They'll listen to you," he said softly, "because you see what they can become, not what they've failed to be." I didn't reply, not out loud. Later, alone in my quarters, I opened a final envelope from Southgate Academy, cream-colored with an embossed seal. The note inside was short. "Dear Captain Quinn, we are honored to restore both your name and your father's to the Wall of Honor, side by side, where they belonged all along. Commandant Avery." I held the letter for a long moment, then folded it and placed it in a small wooden box at my desk. Beside it, a photo, me and my father, long before ships and ghosts and storms. The helm of the Iris waited. I stepped into position, the morning wind catching the edges of my collar as if testing my balance. But I didn't sway. Jada radioed from the engine room confirming thrust readiness. I placed both hands on the wheel. The brass was cool, polished smooth. "Ready." "They tried to erase a legacy," I said, voice quiet just above the hum of the sea. "So I wrote a new one." And the ship moved. The bow split the still water with purpose. No grand music, no confetti. Just motion. Progress. Behind me, the cadets steadied their feet. Ahead, endless blue. I looked forward into the wide mouth of the sea. "Let the sea come," I whispered. "We sail anyway." In the end, the sea did not swallow the truth, it delivered it. What was once buried beneath false records and family silence rose with the voice of a daughter who refused to disappear. Justice didn't arrive with applause, but with the quiet force of someone who dared to remember out loud. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, it came late, but echoed long after the noise faded. Sometimes, all it takes is one steady hand on the helm to change the course of a legacy. If this story moved you, like, share and subscribe, and leave a comment below. Type 1 if you felt seen, or 2 if you're still waiting for justice to find its way.